Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is looking at some astrological information about Morrissey. Morrissey is a British singer, formerly the lead singer with the Smiths, and he has released a number of solo albums. Unfortunately, I don't have his time of birth, so if anybody happens to know what it is, I will certainly update this reading and do it, actually do it all over again. I use Astro Theme to find celebrities' time of birth because they already have a chart created, but I don't use their chart because I don't find it particularly easy to read. I like astro.com for that. So I'm going to be talking about some information with his chart without knowing everything about it. And even in private readings, I will sometimes do readings for people who don't have time of birth. Usually, this will be with love readings when a person doesn't have their partner's time of birth or an ex's time of birth. But occasionally, I have done it with people themselves who don't know, because you can still garner a lot of information without it. So it'll be very interesting. And I have set his time of birth to noon, so it's right smack dab in the middle of the day. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be accurate with some things, and certainly I can't look at the chart itself. So this is what's very interesting is that Morrissey is 0 degrees of Gemini. So regardless of, I shouldn't even say that. If I were to put his time of birth closer to midnight instead of, and I'm talking about from the day before, like right after midnight on the 22nd. And I actually did play around with it, and he would have his sun at 0 degrees of Gemini regardless, even if he was born at midnight, right after the 22nd. But his moon sign could be Sagittarius, because at noon it's at 29 degrees of Scorpio. The moon changes signs every 2 days. So I personally believe that his moon is in Scorpio. And the reason I believe this, now that doesn't mean that it is, and he does have hard angles from the sun and the moon to Pluto, which may have some influence, and we don't know what his rising sign is. So he might have Scorpio rising, or he might have planets in the 8th house, which is Scorpio's domain, which could influence how he expresses himself. His Mercury is in Taurus, but if his Sun and Mercury are in the 8th house, he may have that tendency to kind of speak in a sardonic manner, because he does actually. The reason I say this is because he, in his lyrics, he will say things that are macabre. He'll talk about death. There's a song called There Is a Light and It Never Goes Out. And, one of the lines is something like, and if a 10-ton truck killed the both of us, to die by your side would be the happiest way to die, or something. He says things very, he says like very gruesome or dark things in a humorous way. So that really speaks to the Gemini and the Scorpio elements. And I first became aware of the Smiths, I think was about I don't know if it was 40 years ago. I think it might have been in 1985, actually. And so I was in my late teens, and I wish I could remember exactly how it all went down, but I was immediately hooked. But of course, in those days, we didn't have YouTube, so I was relying mainly on buying. I bought a couple of their most recent albums in the form of tapes and just wore them out. And that's what I consider my emo period. And really felt that he spoke for me, even though he is a gay man from England. So I really would love to know his time of birth because I think I could get more in depth. But I wanted to just touch upon a few things. I wanted to speak about some of the themes of his work, and one of them is about being an outsider and people not understanding. If you listen to The Boy with the Thorn in His Side, it's really about, you could say, about this love that is forbidden. Um, and I would assume he was talking about being gay. Also, the song I referenced before, There Is a Light and It Never Goes Out. It's kind of like being put out of your home for being, maybe for being gay. I just speaking about being gay as a whole, that's why I'm saying I can't really talk too much about that in terms of the astrological influence without having the chart itself to look at. But I will say that the fact that his sun is on the cusp, I think that itself, and especially being in Gemini, which is a mutable air sign, a sign that we would associate with, ruled by Mercury, mercurial, changeable, definitely fluid, maybe gender fluid, if you will. And I'm really talking about, I find him very attractive. But I do think that I think most people would see him as effeminate in his mannerisms. However, I do think that he plays those up and that sometimes he comes across masculine, very, well, I wouldn't say very masculine, but he has times when he can be both of those things, masculine and feminine, and that is that flexibility that we would refer to. But I don't think that anybody would mistake him for a heterosexual man in terms of how he expresses himself, and I don't think he wants to be that. So, that's perfectly fine. I would love to know his rising sign. I get this vibe that he might be Sagittarius rising, only because I don't know, there's something about him that reminds me of Elvis. I mean, even, he had that pompadour hairstyle back when he first started, kind of, putting his hair up, poofing it up and in a gel. That was kind of like how Elvis did it, and with the dark hair and everything. And Elvis had Sagittarius rising, but there have been other rock stars who also had it. Who else? Bob Dylan and Elton John. Now, those individuals definitely do not resemble each other, but to me, it's kind of like an aura because they're all ruled by Jupiter and there can be this excess. So, for instance, with Elvis, it's like gyrating his pelvis during the 1950s, or even wearing a jumpsuit in the 1970s. Remember that the ascendant can be the appearance and the mannerisms. Elton John, certainly he was way over the top with his costumes in the 70s and even the 80s, before he toned it down. And who else did I mention? And Morrissey, I wouldn't say that, he's just excessive, but there's something about it. There's like a rebellious quality that I wouldn't be surprised is connected with Sagittarius, but who knows? And Bob Dylan, I think it's just that aura with Bob Dylan, but he certainly had an iconic look in the 60s. So anyway, one of the things that kind of bothers me, and this is speaking of Bob Dylan, is that Morrissey and Bob Dylan both have Mercury and Taurus as Sun and Gemini individuals. And what bothers me about it, and by the way, Bob Dylan is also close to the cusp. He was born on May 24th, in the like 19, I think it was 1941 or 40, no, 41, I think. So definitely not the same year, but, and Bob Dylan, I think, has also the moon in Taurus, but Mercury in Taurus, I would not expect, because both of these singer-songwriters have lyrics that are very memorable. And you could also, well, with Bob Dylan, very wordy, which I would not associate with Mercury and Taurus. Mercury and Taurus, to me, would be more succinct and actually tight-lipped. But to be quite honest, Bob Dylan, I have seen him in interviews, and he is far from verbose. So maybe it has to do with the sun sign being in Gemini, and that is, the goal-oriented, that those are the goals that we aspire to fulfill. And so maybe the person says, well, I'm a writer, so I'm going to be like a Gemini, and I'm going to write all this stuff. I'm going to be very prolific in my writing and in how I express myself. And so maybe it transcends the actual Mercury sign. And because Gemini is ruled by Mercury, so it's already like that. But that was just one thing that kind of gets me, that his Mercury isn't in Gemini. Another reason why I think his moon could be in Scorpio is apparently he and Johnny Marr, who was the Smiths guitarist and his right-hand man in terms of creating that distinctive Smiths sound. And of course, the bass player, who unfortunately passed away not too long ago, also, I believe his name is Andy Rourke, and he can't be left out of the equation either. But Johnny Marr is an incredible guitarist, and he and Morrissey are not, I don't think they're on speaking terms. And that is something that somebody who's a Scorpio, they might hold a grudge. And even Taurus, Mercury in Taurus, and he's also, Morrissey's also on the cusp of Taurus, this idea of with Mercury, the mindset being in Taurus, the person may have this idea that makes it hard for them to kind of forgive, because they are still holding on to something that somebody did and replaying that memory. Both Taurus and its opposite sign, Scorpio, are fixed signs, so there can be a stubbornness in the person's nature. And I was listening to some Smith songs this morning, and that's what gave me the idea to do it. I actually thought I had already done this reading or this video, but I realized when I was looking at my channel that I kind of decided not to do it because I didn't have his time of birth. But I was like, no, you got to do this, because really, I'm pretty blown away by the fact that when I go out to a cafe, I sometimes hear Smith songs, and it's not that the person is necessarily playing it, the barista. It's like the what do you call it, that satellite radio station or whatever is playing it and choosing it. Now, why are they doing this all of a sudden when I never heard it? I mean, this group is 40 years old. That's when they first started, I think. I mean, when they first had a hit. And I've I've been a fan for like almost that long, and they do not sound dated. There must be something with the younger generation that knows about them, and maybe through alternative channels, maybe through a TV show or what have you, that other generations are discovering them. And I'm just like, it's like really a trip to me that this is happening, because when they were actually making their records, you would not hear them on the radio. They were not in America, maybe in England, but not in America. The only place I would hear them is, I think, like maybe college station or alternative rock. No, actually, the only way I would hear them is by buying their music, and I actually didn't keep doing that. Just didn't do it, and but I did hear it somewhere. I can't remember exactly where. Maybe some kind of college radio station or something. So anyway, I wanted to talk about some of his aspects that I think also contribute to his personality, and one of them. And this was why I was saying, because I was listening this morning and I always read the comments, and somebody said, oh, he's such a egomaniac or something like that, but I love the music, something along those lines. And I was looking at his son. His son has hard angles to it. It's you could say it's badly aspected, which can mean the ego. He has an opposition from the sun to the moon. He has an opposition from, I think this is the egomaniacal side. He has the sun opposing Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is a planet of excess, which means that it can lead, when it's opposing the sun, to delusions of grandeur. I have I have this opposition. What do you think? So anyway, so it's like having an inflated opinion of oneself, which, Jupiter is the great benefic planet. So even when it's misbehaving or, creating a hard angle to another planet, it still is, it's not the end of the world for sure. He also has Mercury opposing Jupiter. So what that can mean is that the person runs their mouth and they don't know when to shut up. And I know that Morrissey has gotten into a bunch of flaps with different celebrities. I heard something about him and Elton John where he was, putting down Elton John. And I have to say, I think that that's really bullshit that he did that, because he was born in 1959. So, first of all, he and Elton John are from England, and he would have been like 11 years old. Well, I'm talking about like in the early 70s, especially when Elton John like really hit it big, like he hit it big like in 1970 or 1971, but he just like really was superstardom. Let's say 1973 when he released Yellow Brick Road, because in England, apparently Tumbleweed Connection and Madman Across the Water did not do that well in his home country, and that bothered Elton John. I cannot imagine, I can't fathom why it did not do at least as well, if not, better than in the United States. Those two albums are absolute masterpieces. So anyway, Morrissey would have been in his early teens during Elton John's, heyday, as far as I'm concerned. So don't tell me that Morrissey didn't love Elton John. As a matter of fact, I kind of believe, I can't remember what song it is, but there was a song that I immediately thought he got the idea for this one passage from Elton John. Not the music, but this kind of like sound effect. And so anyway, I do believe that he probably was inspired, if not influenced, by Elton John. And so it's sad that he would put him down for any reason. I know Elton John certainly has run his mouth off towards other celebrities like Madonna, and I'm sure there are others, but so I guess, we shouldn't feel too sorry for Elton John. But anyway, I just think that maybe Morrissey wanted to stir something up so that he could, promote an album. Who knows? I don't want to accuse him of anything, but I'm just talking about excess with speech. Some of these aspects, I don't know if they would carry throughout the whole day of this particular date. But at noon, at least, the moon would be in conjunction with Jupiter, so that would be good for emotional positivity. But I wanted to talk about the sun and moon squaring off to Pluto, and also the same two planets squaring off to Chiron, because I would say, especially for somebody who is gay, that might be a hint at some of the challenges that he would have faced. And by the way, I don't think that Morrissey, at least I remember back in the day, that he seemed to dismiss his sexuality. I remember reading in interviews, he was like, I don't have a relationship at all. And I have never heard about him with any man, like as a partner. I could be wrong about that. Maybe he just keeps his private life very private, because if he does have the moon in Scorpio, I could see him totally doing that. But, it is possible that even if he is gay, he doesn't really get involved in relationships that much. Oh yeah, there's another song called Suede Head, where he kind of like, he seems like bitter about something that there's a line that he repeats in Suede Head where he says, it was a good lay. And that is kind of ironic, because that's kind of something that a woman might say in bitterness if she feels that she was used sexually by a man. And so here we have a man ostensibly saying it about another man, that kind of in a bitter sort of a way. But that's not the only song. I can think of at least one more song. I can't remember exactly which one, where it's kind of like talking about maybe like a one night stand, or a brief encounter rather than a relationship, but maybe he wanting that relationship and the other person kind of blowing him off, perhaps something along those lines. So who knows what kind of experiences he has had, and if that kind of like made him less inclined to pursue relationships on a regular basis or at all. But the square between the Sun and Pluto indicates somebody who may have been blocked, their light may have been blocked by somebody in a position of power. So when you have somebody who's an artist and there's somebody standing in their way, so we could say like an authority figure, that would make a lot of sense, like a parent who doesn't want them to do that particular career. So obviously here we're talking about singing. It seemed to me that he had a good relationship with his mother, but I can't remember. And I don't know about his father. That would be very interesting to know more information about that, if his father was in his life and what kind of dynamic they had, if so. But of course, it is not unusual for a parent to be against their child, their young adult, going into some kind of creative field if they feel that it's an unstable type of profession. Maybe they don't respect it to begin with. And that's an example of kind of blocking the light, because the sun is creative, is a creative force, and Pluto is squaring off to it. I have this square as well, and it doesn't mean, sometimes you might have a parent who is supportive on one level, but not on another level. It's not black and white, I would say. And with the moon square Pluto, this is definitely, the sun can be the father and the moon can be the mother. And this can be the kind of mother who is overly involved in her child's life, and emotionally it can be like a vampire type of situation where the mother is kind of trying to possess the child, merge with the child. If this is the sun, sometimes it can be, I hesitate to use this term, emotional incest, but that type of, I'm just saying that this can be true in some cases where the mother kind of uses her son as a substitute for her husband on an emotional level. So let's say she divorces from her husband, or he dies, or whatever, that he's not there. He's a workaholic, or he's, whatever he's doing. And she turns to her son and she confides in her son and uses her son as emotional support. Some people might say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that a child, and I'm including an adolescent, should never be used as a substitute for an adult or a therapist or something like that. That's parentifying a child, and that is not their role. That is not, a child should not be burdened with an adult's problems. And there's also, it can cross a boundary too, because if the son becomes a confidant, then that it kind of like blurs the lines. And that's what I was talking about in that case. And of course, there's that cliche about the homosexual boy whose mother is overbearing and all of that stuff, which is ridiculous. I mean, sometimes it actually comes out that way, but it's not because of that, because there are plenty of overbearing mothers and their sons are straight. So, we can dismiss that right away. But I find that interesting that he does happen to have that square between the moon and Pluto, and also his moon might actually be in Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto. So that intensifies that kind of dynamic. And I noticed that when Morrissey refers to women, he does so in a way that kind of sometimes to me indicates a bit of hostility. But it's kind of funny. I don't take offense at it. But it's like, it totally reminds me of the male who had that kind of dynamic with his mother. So he kind of has a love-hate relationship with the opposite sex because of it. Maybe projecting those qualities onto women in general as being devouring, for instance. And then with the squares to Chiron, the Sun square Chiron is the identity, the painful identity issue, where the person, who they are at their core, which the Sun is supposed to be the authentic self, it's squaring off to something that's very painful. And you can also find when somebody has Chiron in the first house that this can show up in terms of, in some cases, being gay. Not always, because it depends on the environment that you are brought up in. If you're brought up in a very open-minded environment, maybe where you see examples of people who are in same-sex relationships, a very liberal, very progressive type of environment, it's not going to be a big deal. If you're brought up in a more conservative environment, it could be a big deal. And conservative can be a working class environment where there tends to be more conformity, I would say. There tends to be more conservative ideas. Either a working class or a religious, sometimes with a religious environment, there are belief systems that go against that, what they would call a choice, but that, or a lifestyle. I'm not calling it that. I'm saying that they would call it that. And this can be cultural. This can be people from certain cultures where it is frowned upon and stuff like that. But as we know, just because something is frowned upon and disparaged doesn't mean that people of that culture do not have those desires and even practices. So it doesn't obliterate it because the culture rejects it. So that can be a real conflict for that person in terms of their identity, because it makes them feel like there is something wrong with them and that they are not accepted for who they are. But the interesting thing about squares is that it can give a person, I can't think of the term, like it gives them something to work on in terms of, who they are, so that even though they have these obstacles, they can grow into a stronger person because of it. With the moon square Chiron, it can give an emotional sensitivity that makes it, that feels problematic in a sense, because the person may be a lot more sensitive than they allow themselves to admit. And so that their feelings can get hurt. And I will say too, that with that dichotomy of the sun in an air sign and the moon in water, if that's the case, which I think it might be, there is already something at play which is very hard, I think, is very complicated. I've said this before, when the moon is in Scorpio, I feel like the moon in Scorpio is the hardest, is the toughest moon to have in a lot of ways, because there's so much complication with the person's emotions. There's so much going on beneath the surface. And there may be a lot that the person has had to deal with in their past. And when you have the sun in an air sign, so whether it's Gemini or whether it is Libra or Aquarius, and it's going to be a little bit different for each of those air signs, having Scorpio as a moon sign can be an extra challenge, because air signs don't want to go there. You know, Scorpio is a shadow self. And so there is an emotional desire to kind of experience those taboo feelings and subject matters. But the sun wants to kind of, the sun in an air sign wants to kind of live above it all. And they want to remain detached. There's a heaviness emotionally with Scorpio. So there is quite a conflict between that sun and moon. And sure enough, at noon, it is indicated with that opposition. And probably I would say all day, because Jupiter is at 26 degrees of Scorpio. And, well, I can't say for sure. I'm not going to look at all of the possibilities for the sun, but I will just assume that there's an opposition between his sun and moon, I should say. I said Jupiter, I meant his moon. But anyway, another aspect that he has that is a hard angle is an opposition between Venus and Saturn. This, along with the square between Venus and Saturn, can be the person who feels unloved. And when somebody feels this way, and I should have said by the parents. So if that is the case, that is yet another thing that a child can internalize, and they can create stories out of that. Because even if somebody is neglected emotionally by one's parents or abused in some way by one's parents, it certainly doesn't mean that they are unlovable. And unfortunately, this is something that people assume because of what has happened, and it can kind of follow them for the rest of their life. And when you have the moon in Scorpio, you might, if he does, I should say, there can even be the cynicism that the person kind of sees the dark side of life, and they might see the dark. So they're almost like a paranoia, and I do, like, there's trust issues when people have prominent, have a personal planet in Scorpio, where they suspect wrongdoing by other people when perhaps it isn't even there in some cases. And so that's why I say that's like a form of cynicism, but also paranoia. And certainly that can have an adverse impact on one's life. So I think I'm going to leave it there. One thing I'll say too, in terms of artistic talents, he has a trine between, he has a trine between Venus and Neptune. Venus is the planet that can be about beauty and art, and Neptune can be about inspiration. So the trine is the easiest flowing aspect. So that means that it can be easy for such a person to kind of take from, I would even say, the universal mind, the Akashic records, or whatever you're tapping into for inspiration. It's easy for, and I'm saying that Neptune could be that, and the person can kind of get those ideas for their artistic creations very easily. And by the way, his Venus and Mars are both in Cancer, which again, these are water signs. So the person with the sun and air having all this water, and the water is feminine too. So that can also indicate the man who is very much in touch with his feminine side. Okay, that's what I have for Morrissey. Again, if you have his time of birth, please let me know and give me the source of that information. I can't remember if I tried to look at other places other than Astro Theme, but I might try to do that. But I've already done over 41 minutes of this, so having to do it all over again, that would kind of suck. I think I got a lot out of it. So I hope you enjoyed this. Take care. Bye.